I was always the person who wanted to understand why things worked. My parents always liked to talk about how I was the kid that asked why all the time and like continuously wanted to know why everything happened, to the point where they bought me the whole set of the Ask Me Why books so that I would just, read those and stop asking as many questions. I still remember when my dad bought the first major computer and brought it home, and the first time you got to play with a CD-ROM and that side. I was definitely someone who I would wake up before everybody else. I could get on the computer and be the first one to play with it and do that side. So it was definitely like that. My dad was in insurance, but he's he's amazing at math and is very he kind of got us excited about that side, but he applies it in insurance. And then my mom was an art teacher, which I think is why I do so much visualization now and that side of it, because she's kind of shown the artistic side of it throughout. I've been excited about STEM since I was really little. I think I didn't know, there were times where I wanted to be a writer, or I wanted, I didn't always know exactly what I wanted to do, but I've always really liked the STEM side of things. I had a lot of really close friends, even when I was really little, that also really liked STEM. So I had a couple close girlfriends that really liked similar things. And I have an older sister that I think really helped, kind of teach me about everything. Whatever she was learning in school, she would try to come home and teach me about it at home. Even, she's 4 years older than me, and it was probably I wasn't really ready to learn everything, but she was very excited about whatever she learned in science class, she would come home and want to make sure I knew it and prepare me for it. So I think that really helped, of having people around that were also really excited to talk about those kinds of things. In 8th grade, you could test into the science center, so I wanted to try out for it, and they took maybe 10 people from each school, and then we'd all get together with people from different schools and kind of spend half the day together at this math science center, and then half the day at your home school for English and history and everything else. And that was really fantastic. And the teachers there, that's where I first learned about coding, and the teachers there were really amazing, and that had a really big impact. Mr. Zwankevich was our computer science teacher, and he was just, he made it really exciting. He would make a game out of it, and he would kind of, he really, we did things we all wrote birthday cards to Bjorn Strostrup when we learned about C++, and it was just little things of trying to make it a full person, and just kind of getting you excited about everything in the area. And there were things he had actually gone to Harvard, so I know I did a summer school at Harvard when I was in high school, and he spent a few days beforehand drawing the maps, and he was the only person I had ever known who had gone to Harvard, and it was very, very exciting to meet somebody from that side. He really cared about all the students, and he just took a lot of time to kind of see what you were excited about and help you find that. And I think a lot of us ended up going into computer science and that side after having that class, because he was really fantastic. So so I was on First Robotics, which it's one of the big competitions in the U.S. where they have robotics teams from all over the country. And when I used to do it, the competition at the end, the world competition, was at Disney World, and you'd all go to Disney together, and you'd have to build the robot and build it and program it and do the entire thing. I was kind of involved in all aspects, even from helping design our T-shirts to how do we make the robot. I was not very good at driving the robot, so I did they never let me drive the robot in the competition. But I really liked just I got more involved on the coding side, but I was interested in how you actually build them and do that side. It was definitely trial and error, and it was not something that came as naturally to me, but I found it really interesting. So I went to Duke wanting to study international relations. So it was all around the time of the Human Genome Project, and the importance of, I really liked science, but I also wanted to, I think the way that could play out on the international scale seemed really, significant and something I wanted to look into. So I wanted to double major in international relations and in genetics, I think, at the time. And then I got to Duke and realized they didn't actually have either an international relations major or a genetics major. They had a certificate that had just ended right before I got there, and so that was an interesting side. And then when I got there, I switched over. So I ended up doing a minor in political science and kind of kept that side of it going a little bit. And I was purely starting out in physics as a freshman. And then one of my friends needed help tutoring in computer science, and I spent so much time, spending time with him, teaching him how to do the programming side. I realized I really missed it, and that was something that I really wanted to do, and I switched over, and so I ended up being a double major in computer science and physics, mainly after helping try to tutor one of my friends. I'm definitely the person, like, I love staying up all night coding. I like the problem solving side of it. And I like puzzles. I kind of see that, like, our kids now, we do tons of puzzles together. And I think coding, it's kind of like that same approach where, like, you're trying to figure out what's going to make it work, but it's a very concrete, like, there's something you can do that's going to find that solution. And it's very clear of the impact that you're having. I've always liked the coding side of things. And I'm, like, throughout at Duke, I think some of the best times were always, like, we had a team of people that we did our projects together, and we would have, like, we definitely have, like, many all-nighters in the computer lab trying to get the code working, getting everything together. That I really enjoyed that and kind of thrived off that versus being annoyed that you're having an all-nighter to do this. Like, I think the bonding together and trying to code and staying up to do that was always, like, some of the most fun times. I always liked the idea of applying all of the biomedical, like all of the computer science work to biomedical problems. But I wanted to take it, I like the physics approach where you're coming from, like, first principles, you can describe it, there are equations where it makes sense, which especially in biology it can be really difficult. So I really liked the physics-based approaches, but I love doing the computing side. So I'd say, like, I liked the bio, but I didn't, I wasn't getting a major or anything on that side. I started out as a freshman. I took a biotech seminar course. So they had, we took they had a whole setup with this, the way they do it at Duke, where your freshman year, you can have, like, a philosophy class associated with biotech, you have the biology class associated with it, and then you have the kind of a tech program, and then you have, like, a group where you all get together once a week and kind of talk about how these, like, all of this intersects. And then as part of this focus program, they actually took us to DC, and we got to go visit, like, the Venter Institute, and we visited some of the NIH labs that were really working on the Human Genome Project. And it was nice because, like, at that stage, they had just sequenced the genome and they kind of had all the data, and it was right at the point where you needed computer science to help understand everything you were getting out of all those experiments. And so it was, like, for me, it was a good time to have visited because it got me excited of, like, okay, this is where, I understand the computing, I'm excited about the computing, and we can really have a huge impact on a real biomedical problem. So I came back, I worked in a few different bioinformatics labs as an undergrad. So all of my research experience throughout, I did a little bit in photonics, but I did mostly, I was working in some different research labs on bioinformatics. So I did that where I was getting exposed to the bio side. They definitely did try to, like, make me do PCR and try experiments for a little while to get experience with that, which I was not as excited about. And I would always, like, find ways to go work with the people in the computer science side of it. So I got really excited about the health application. I really think working at the intersection between disciplines is the most exciting part of research. I think that's where some of the more, like, more innovative findings can really come from, where you're taking, like, drawing something from one field and really applying it elsewhere in a way that people maybe haven't seen yet or haven't used. I think that's really fun. I think you can, get to work with a lot of different people from these different areas, and you'll find something like that. I think some of the most exciting breakthroughs kind of come from that area. So that's kind of where I've been. Everything I've worked on has been kind of at the, it's not a pure computer science or not pure math. It is very applied and drawing from different areas, and I think that's really fun and rewarding. I think just trying to find, like, new, like, it's always been something where I've wanted to find different ways to approach problems or use, how do we actually use these different tools, like the large supercomputers, or, now we're doing a lot of virtual reality. Like, it's like, okay, here's a fun new technology tool. How do we actually use this to solve different problems that might not have been used for before? The high risk, high reward projects are the most fun projects that I've worked on. I think obviously there is a risk, and you should always have, like, some stable projects on the side, but you're going to have the most fun working on things that are kind of outside of the box, a little bit out there and a little crazy, but, like, it's a lot more fun to work on. I think even, like, all of my first grants in my lab were all in this, like, in high risk, high reward programs where it's like they would never get funded in a conventional setting. It is not, conventional ideas, but it's been really fun to kind of try to see, okay, like, this sounds kind of audacious and may not ever happen. Like, my first grant was, can we model, all the blood cells in the entire body, which isn't even feasible. Like, you really need other methods to be able to get there. But it's like, well, what if we could, and how would you get there? And if we try to get there, you may not get all the way, but you're going to move the bar significantly. And I think it can be really rewarding. If you're only doing science that's safe, that's not going to be as fun, it's not going to be as rewarding, and I don't think you're going to get as far. And if you're only doing projects that are going to succeed, that you're not really pushing the bar that far, right? Like, I think being able to try something, and you have to be willing to accept failure, it's a critical part of the science, and trying to figure out, how do we push the boundaries, and, like, everything you try isn't going to work, but if you don't try new things, like, how are you ever going to, like, push innovation and be able to do that? So I think it is definitely a critical part of the process. the bigger message is just like, be willing to try things that, be willing to fail, be willing to take that risk, and be willing to be courageous and try something that's, really outside the box and go for it, because that's where you're going to see the biggest impact. There's a point where, so they have a program at Jülich Supercomputing Center here, and here in Germany, where you have to apply and you have to show that you can run on the extreme scale. And it means, like, at the time they had the supercomputer with the most, like, the highest number of cores. So they had, it was like 200,000 cores at the time or something. It was one of the largest supercomputers by core in the world. And the only way you'd ever get to work on one is you came here, and they let you have access to it for a whole week, and they gave everyone in the program access. And the first thing I did when we got here is I managed to crash my program, and then I canceled the program, which then crashed the entire system and brought the entire supercomputer down, where they had to reboot it. And then it was like 45 minutes of them trying to reboot it, which then it's like they started calculating while we were sitting there, like how many pennies it cost per core per minute that I was costing them. And I was a graduate student, and they were like making all these jokes about, we're going to have to charge your advisor this amount of money, which I wasn't 100% positive if they were joking at the time. And it was that was special. Yeah. So when I was graduating, I was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I knew I really liked the idea of doing something with health and something with computing. I was debating going to graduate school. And I had gotten into some really fantastic programs. I've been doing a lot of the photonics side, and I've been doing optics, and debating going in that direction. But everything I wanted to do with optics, I would have wanted to use computing and apply it to health. And then I also started going out on job interviews because I really liked I liked the computing side. I had an interview at IBM, and I ended up, I was interviewing for the operating systems team, and then somehow got a job offered on the Blue Gene team, because however that had worked out. And I had no idea what a supercomputer was. I had zero experience in high performance computing. I had never heard of MPI, and I didn't know anything about the parallel computing side. But I knew that they were using Blue Gene for health-related applications, and they were building a computer to work on the biological side. So I thought that was really exciting. And it was like, this would be my dream job after graduate school, to go use large-scale computing to answer biological questions. So I took the position. I went to Rochester, Minnesota, and I was really lucky with, the team there was absolutely fantastic. But it was I learned, I definitely learned a lot from them. There was someone, I think it was 4 months after I got there, that someone gave a really in-depth talk about what is Blue Gene, how is it set up, what's the architecture, and it was like, oh, okay, now I get it. But it was definitely 4 months in, it was like, okay, this is helpful. But it was, I spent time on the performance team, I was on the applications team, and so I really got to see all different aspects of the supercomputer, and that was really useful. Being at IBM during that time was, it was a really unique experience, and it was great. We were building the supercomputers, but it was it was a small team of people in Rochester that were really building all the components of that supercomputer that were kind of just down the hall. So you had the compiler team down the hall, and you had everybody doing each side. But the key part was they were building it, and it was brand new. So if your code didn't work, you didn't know if it was because your code didn't work, or if because the compiler was failing, or if it was because the MPI collectives weren't written properly, or everything was kind of in flux. But I think by going through that, it made me such a better debugger and programmer, because you had to sit there and be like, okay, what are the 10,000 things that could be going wrong? Is it just did the hardware give out? And there, it could be wrong across the board. And then it was really you had to go around and talk to everybody else and learn how to work with the rest of the team to be okay, here's the problem I'm having. Let's try to identify, is it just that I wrote my application wrong, or is there something else going on in the background? So I think it was a really great experience to learn, how to really trust your code, how to debug it well, and really understand what's going on. So it was an exciting period, because that's right when Blue Gene started becoming #1, and it was a fun time to be a part of the Blue Gene team. In Rochester, Minnesota is where Mayo Clinic is. So you would get any collaboration between IBM and Mayo Clinic, we would get to work on, and that was amazing. And that meant we got to do a lot of the bio-related. We did some molecular docking projects, and we did some really interesting applications. But typically, any of the applications and any of the use, we were building the supercomputer, and then any of the use of the supercomputer happened at IBM Research. And to be over at IBM Research, you had to have a PhD at the time. So that was a lot of what my thinking was like, I go get a PhD and then come back to IBM research eventually. And then one of the teams we had worked with was at Harvard, so I had touched base with them as well. And like I had looked at many other schools, but then asked like, to be introduced to some faculty there, and then ended up going there for my PhD. But the goal was to really go back and like figure out how to actually use the supercomputer versus just trying to make it faster or get some codes to run on it slightly faster. I really wanted to be the one using it. I joined Tim Kaxiris' lab when I got to Harvard, and he's an amazing physicist who's very well known, more on DFT and multi-scale modeling. And so we had talked about a few different projects to try to kind of get involved with and start out in. We had started with a DNA sequencing project, and then he also had this like blood flow simulation work going, and I had joined that probably my second year. And really, haven't looked back since. But it's he really exposed me to how you can use physics-based models in the biological space and kind of approach it from there. And that's where that got started. I worked with Tim, and then Hans-Peter Pfister was my co-advisor. And while I was working with both of them, I developed this code called Harvey. And so it's named after William Harvey, who discovered that blood circulates through the body. But it was also, we were at Harvard at the time, so it was, it's supposed to be, cute calling it Harvey. And so what it is it's a lattice Boltzmann-based code, but it was written from the beginning with parallel computing in mind. So it was meant to scale and written for the big supercomputers to try to have, patient-specific. We could take in geometries that you'd get from segmenting like CT scans or MRI scans. You get a triangulated mesh out of that, take that in as your input file, and then run blood flow simulations on these triangulated meshes. So it's really like it's a large-scale parallel computing code for fluid dynamics. The goal is to model like the 3D blood flow in someone's arteries. So we would get, for example, a 3D mesh file representing your coronary arteries, and then we would run a blood flow simulation in that mesh file. And like some of the studies we've been doing now, you can use like it basically makes like a digital model of the patient. So instead of having to put a guide wire down their coronary arteries and measure the pressure in their artery itself, you could measure it within within our digital model. And we've shown that that's very accurate. We can match what you're getting with the invasive guide wires, but it allows you to get that measurement completely non-invasively just based on data that you're getting from like the CT images or whatever medical images you're focused on. And that allows, the pressure measurement is what, clinicians are using. It's called fractional flow reserve. It's, if you take the pressure before the lesion and after the lesion, it's just the pressure gradient across that lesion. And if it's above or below 0.8, that's when they decide to give you a stent. So it's a really, useful first step of trying to do diagnosis for, the ischemic burden of heart disease and identify how do we need to treat these patients, but then doing that using these digital models instead of, having to put a guide wire in the patient. I personally think that digital twins for everybody is very realistic, is a really very realistic vision. I think we're going to get there. I think it's going to come in different steps. So it's, we've been really focused on vascular digital twins and everything related to the blood flow and your circulatory system. I think we'll see, we're already seeing personalized models like for fractional flow reserve in the clinic, FDA approved. It's it's being used in the U.S. You see it in the U.K. It's been in different places around the world, and that's being already adopted. I wouldn't say those are necessarily digital twins yet. They're more like a personalized model. I think you need to be connected to wearables or have it needs the continued information from that physical asset to really be a digital twin. But we're getting to that point, and I think in the next 5-10 years we'll see the first real digital twin that's connecting with this data and this continuous information you can get remotely. I think we'll see that being adopted, and then hopefully we'll see broadening from just the vascular digital twins to other systems in that side as well. And I think it's very tenable in the next in the future. As we're trying to build these digital twins, we need to have a keen eye on what the security is and how do we do this in a secure fashion. So I think that is what is the best way to build these, who should retain the data, and how do we do it, kind of both on the security side for the medical records and the patient that they have, but then also how do you do it in a way that allows open science and discovery and reproducibility of your science, and doing that in a way that doesn't then expose the patients to other, to having their data out there. So really, finding ways to have surrogates or, other data that would, de-identify the information to show reproducibility of the algorithms and allow us to validate the algorithms, but then ways to, either embed this in electronic health records or, how we can do it in a way that is, not just available somewhere for everybody to access. So I think that the security side is has to be developed hand in hand with as we're developing the digital twins themselves. I think doctors always say if you did image someone, you'd find 20 problems you didn't know you had that aren't actually manifesting into anything, and then you'd start thinking you have all these diseases. And if we have too much of a digital twin, is that a double-edged sword where you don't want to know enough that too much about yourself. I think a lot of it is going to be how do we have all that information and do something useful with it? And then just how do we parse it too? Because we're really good at taking a small amount of data and turning it into petabytes of data. And you're not going to just hand your doctor, here are my petabytes of all of my wearable data and all of my digital twin information for the last 20 years. So it's, how do we do it? How do we find data to we don't want to have too many, you don't want to have false positives. Similarly, having any kind of false positive or negative can be a large problem in this case. You don't want to overwhelm the hospitals because everybody gets a, signal on their watch and then they all run into the hospital. And if this becomes as ubiquitous as you want it to be, that is a significant risk. So it's trying to figure out what information do they want to have that is actually actionable and really useful for them. When I was a grad student and I was trying to kind of figure out the next stages, I gave a talk at the supercomputing conference, probably 2011, 2012, on all of the heart research that I was doing. And then Jerry Lee, who was a researcher at the NIH, happened to attend supercomputing and happened to go to my talk. And at the end of my talk, he came up and he was like, this is great, but have you ever thought about cancer? Which I had not thought about applying this to cancer in any way at that stage. And he sent me some papers afterwards about, circulating tumor cells and how they're moving through the body and how he thought that physics-based modeling might really be able to help. And so I continued talking to him after that, and I think just that conversation had a huge impact on the direction of my career. And my first grant was on, while I was at Lawrence Livermore, was on how do we model cancer cells and try to build up a simulation there. I was really lucky when I was at Lawrence Livermore. I met Francisca Mikor, who was at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and she let me, I would spend 2 weeks at Lawrence Livermore in California and then 2 weeks in Boston at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and did that every 2 weeks for a year and a half or two years. But it was perfect because it let me be in person with everyone at the DOE lab. Livermore had the biggest supercomputer at the world at the time. And I was with those computational physicists, learning how to scale my code, how to build better physics models that would actually be able to make use of the system. And then I would come back to Boston and spend time with the cancer researchers, really trying to understand what are the problems we can solve, what role can computation play in this space, how do you connect with the experimentalists and test this data. And I really got to see it from both sides, and I think that was really formative for me, of trying to figure out how can we use these models. And then the way we're trying to use them, the heart disease side, it's much more translational, and we're much closer to being able to deploy it in the clinic. I think on the cancer side, it's much more on the discovery and basic research side, where we are at this stage trying to understand what it is about those cancer cells that are making them have a higher residence time at different locations. So why is it more likely to be metastatic? But trying to understand, is it the adhesive receptors? Is it the biomechanical properties? But in the simulation, you can hold everything else the same and then just change the deformability of the cell or the size of the nucleus, or where the receptor is, or even just the bond strength of that specific ligand receptor pairing, and see what exactly is changing the trajectory of the cell, or if you change this one thing, it causes the residence time to change significantly. And then once you can identify that, you can start building therapeutics that are targeting that component of the cell. So it really allows us to understand, what are the mechanical properties that are driving the disease progression. So it's more, more on the discovery of trying to understand, where the cancer metastasis is coming from and what's causing it. There are many challenges of, trying to get algorithms that can scale different spatial and temporal domains and kind of addressing that. But the data challenge is a huge issue for us. As I was saying earlier, like we take in a little bit of data, and then when we run the simulation, we use often the entirety of the supercomputer, which has about a petabyte of memory, and we are generating about, every time step a petabyte of memory. Like we can generate a lot of data, and we can turn it into, if you're trying to understand the entire flow field around 500 million cells, and you're seeing all the cell deformations, it's we're generating petabytes and petabytes of data to understand these different systems. I think that's necessary in the discovery phase, so we don't know what we're looking for. So we need to hold everything, we need to go through and find it. But a lot of the time once we identify what it is about, the characteristic of that cancer cell, or what that digital biomarker is that's predictive of heart failure, or whatever it is we're trying to find, we can then, build an AI surrogate or something that is like, a reduced order model to target that specific quantity. And so, when we deploy it in the future, you won't need all of the world's biggest supercomputer, but the discovery phase, we really need it. And then that results in, the need to handle tons of data. And I feel like, a lot of my time now is spent on trying to figure out how do we optimize our storage, how do we buy more storage, and how do we handle the data problem. I think AI is going to be critical in the we have so much data, and it's multimodal data, and you would want to be able to put, in an ideal world, you'd have the electronic health record, the wearable data, but you'd even have, air quality data and, elevation, anything about, everything kind of going on. But in order to try to assess all of that data, machine learning and AI are really playing a key role in kind of, how do you assess the multimodal data sets and identify what these digital biomarkers are that they could be something, it could be as simple as vorticity where we know what it is, or it could be, some kind of esoteric kind of digital biomarker where you take a part of, different weights to each part of these, and you put that together, and it'll help us identify your heart failure earlier. So I think AI is critical in identifying the new biomarkers, but then it's also, when we identify what it is, we can build these AI surrogates that can be deployed at the edge, in the, on the cloud or on your device, and make it much more, translatable and able to be used in the clinic or outside. I left Livermore in 2015 and started a new lab at Duke. I was really excited to go back to Duke. I had gone there for undergrad, and I love Duke. I'm a huge Duke basketball fan. It was very exciting to go back and kind of lead things there. I think it was nice to kind of return almost home to kind of start your real independent career on that side. It was a really good way of, I always had the two-body problem and trying to find, a city and a place where both my husband and I could find really good positions and be happy there on that end. So Duke offered kind of a city where my husband could get a really good position that he was really happy with. I, loved Duke and was excited to be there. Duke is fantastic in that they have an amazing engineering program. Their biomedical engineering program is one of the best in the country, if not the world. They have fantastic students. The colleagues are great. But then literally across the street is the hospital. So it made it so much easier to go get, to get data, to have collaborations, and that, it's, I have doctors that come and they'll, stop by and give guest lectures in my classes, where it's because it's just across the street. It's really easy. They can stop in and do that. And the students in my lab can go and attend and see what's going on in a surgery and see a real life, really see what's happening on the clinic. So it makes the collaboration much stronger. It's really important to me that whatever we're working on is going to benefit people at some point. Everyone who's doing, amazing work on just the pure mathematics and the algorithm and the pure science side. But for me, I'm really motivated by how can we actually help people, and how do we get this out of just the research space and the papers and do something that's really going to matter in 10, 15 years and can really help people. When the COVID pandemic first started happening, one of the big issues, if everybody remembers, was that that we had a shortage of ventilators. We were running low on ventilators, and when we were talking, there was a graduate student that came and had known about my research and had said, he was also an MD, and he was trying to figure out, is there a way that we could make a ventilator work for multiple patients, and how do we kind of split the ventilators in a safe way? Because at the time it was really hard to set up, and it was really a fluid problem of how to set up the pressure so that if you have two patients who have different lung pressures, how do you use the same ventilator and safely use that for two patients. So he was developing this little tool that would allow you to modify it and allow different pressure to go to each patient, and you'd have to know kind of solve a fluid problem and optimize it for those two patients. So it was a really interesting we had just been home, I think, 2 or 3 weeks when we had just all been sent home. And he reached out, and then I reached out to my lab and asked if anyone was interested in working on it. And I think within a month, we were kind of up and running. It was a fun, like everybody, it wasn't their PhD research. It wasn't what they were meant to do. It was just kind of adjacent, and they all had the skill set to help. And we set up, we had one model where we're like, okay, we're going to try a 1D model, we're going to try a MATLAB model, we're going to try a 3D model. And we had different teams that were all just okay, we're all going to run it this week. You try your thing, and then we'll see which one works. And then kind of sync up, a few days later and see which direction we're going to go in. We had a company volunteer their time that helped us make an app so that the doctors could then work with the tools we were making. So you could enter in the information about, the 2 different patients you were trying to work with, the information about the ventilator setup, and then it would tell you how to modify this tool based on our simulations. And there was an iPhone app to be able to do that this company had stepped up for. We had to, so basically it's a combinatorial problem. So you have all the different options of the different pressure for the 2 different patients. And you probably could have done a very smart way of calculating this, but we just, given the time, just went through a brute force option of okay, if we just model all of the different combinations, we can basically make a lookup table that goes into this iPhone app. There's no need for any further compute. And then the doctors can look up how do you actually optimize how do you actually split the ventilators safely? So then we worked with, there's a large program at the time where they were donating compute time. So we went to work with Microsoft on this. They donated tons of compute time from AWS. And it was I think we met the AWS team on a Monday or a Tuesday. And it was by Saturday, we simulated, I don't even remember how many, so many compute hours in one weekend, and we were done within a week. We had all of the simulations. They deployed them all over the world. They had different instances in their cloud services. They gave us so many resources, but they brought in, scientists and they brought in a whole team to help make sure anything we needed to make that happen. And it was we had so much data and so everything within, it was literally we met them on Monday. By the following Monday, we had all of the data, and it was amazing, a really fun research project, and it was very rewarding. We have 3 kids that are all very close in age. I had just come off of maternity leave for about a week when everyone was sent home from COVID. And so there were interesting pieces of when we were doing the COVID project, the twins were on every single call. And it was very much one would cry and I would pick them up and they'd join the video call, and they'd stop crying and I'd put them down and pick up the other one. And they were very much a part of this project. Having people from the Microsoft collaborators who are willing to be supportive and okay with having random babies. I think all of the doctors we worked with on the fractional flow reserve project, we have, they all know the kids from being on all the video calls because they got to know them. So part of it is, finding ways to make things work when you're with the kids and kind of doing that. We have, my husband is an incredibly, he's really helpful, and I think that's been a critical part of it, of having someone who, understands that we both have, difficult jobs, we both have a lot going on, and really splitting the work. He does all the cooking, I do none of the cooking, and so he really makes things happen. We do a lot of I do the long-term planning, he does the short-term, making it making my plans actually happen, and so it's kind of trying to figure out ways to work with things, finding boundaries and learning to set those boundaries. So it's sometimes it can be harder for me to travel to conferences. For the first couple of years when they were really little, I did not travel as much because we have no family in the area. It was a lot for him to just put everybody to bed by themselves, and I would not leave for more than a night or so, and I would try to limit travel as much as possible because it was just. It wasn't feasible to do that. So there were, making choices of even if you were invited to really exciting things that you wanted to be involved in, trying to figure out how to balance it. I had many meetings where, I don't know, when I gave a talk at Vertex Pharmaceuticals, and they made sure, because it was they made sure I had a room if I needed to go pump and handle everything. They were there and very progressive and helpful on that side. Even when I did NSF panels, they would do things let me turn off the camera, so when we were doing them in the pandemic, so that I could pump but still be on the call. So they I don't know, just finding ways to kind of make it work, and being knowing when to set your boundaries of what you're willing to say yes to and not, and even now, I still am trying to limit travel so I'm not away from them as much, and that side. It can be hard and challenging, but it's definitely worth it, and kind of understanding what is difficult for you and what is making it hard for you. And first off, it's okay. you don't have to justify why it's hard for you to anybody, but knowing what you need to ask for help. So there were things like I didn't realize, when I had my twins, I had 1 semester of maternity leave per the Duke policy. And I was just like, okay, that's how it is. And, I'll deal with that. And then when I went to lunch with a lot of my female colleagues, I had one of the senior colleagues was like, this is not acceptable. You need more time. Like, you have twins. How are you going to come back in just a couple of months? Because I was also having them in October, like halfway through that semester off anyway. And by the end of the day, she had gone and like talked to the chair, and he was, incredibly supportive and willing. And they gave me an extra semester off. That it hadn't occurred to me to advocate for myself and ask for that semester off. So having just, female mentors that, nudged me and kind of told me like it's okay to ask for these things, but also just knowing that it's okay to ask for these things and understanding, what it is that you need. I think role models are, I've had so many role models that have had such a significant impact. I think there are down to I mentioned I had a co-advisor, Hans-Peter Pfister at Harvard. He had young kids and he was going through the tenure process at Harvard, which is notoriously one of the more difficult tenure processes. And he had a very strict he would make sure he was home to be with his kids, and he had he would set a deadline, and he would oftentimes he would go home, put the kids to bed, and he would come back online, and you'd get emails from him later. But there was a window where he was with his kids, and it was really nice to have a man setting that as an example, and seeing that you can do that, you can still be successful, you can still get tenure at somewhere like Harvard, and have that be possible. There are people like Franziska Mikor, who I worked with at Dana-Farber, is one of the smartest mathematicians. She's absolutely amazing, and her goal in life is to really apply this work and have an impact on people's lives versus just trying to do the next best paper. And it was. I learned a lot from her about, how to balance her family, and she had young kids when I was with her, and then also just, how to really do research that's going to matter and affect differently, that can actually be deployed and have an impact. I think having people that you can see that are, kind of doing the kinds of things you want to do, and, having mentors and role models has been a huge part for my career. So I have 2 cats that are named Ada after Ada Lovelace, and Grace after Grace Hopper. I don't know how to describe that. I think it's important that we have female role models in computer science, and I really respect them, and somehow that translates to naming my cats after them. But I think it's important, and it's been kind of fun in that I won the Grace Hopper Award, and it was kind of fun when it was I have my cat Grace, and then my kids when they're reading all the books about we have all the Rebel Girls and the female scientists, and when they find Ada and Grace in the books, it's reinforcing and nice that they really know who they are and where it came from and why it was important. I think we need young people in this field. There are so many challenges, but so many opportunities for trying to get, using, there's so much going on with AI and machine learning and everything there, but trying to do that in a way that can really have an impact in health, and that can be in a secure, safe manner, but that can be scalable and can bring in all of this data. And we've been doing work with the virtual reality side of then how do you actually interact with the data, and how do you do it in an immersive set? We need people to kind of be pushing on all these fronts. We need new algorithms to be able to look at much longer time domains, to be able to get to higher spatial resolution. We need people who are really good at coding, who can really make that go, make use of the new hardware and do that in a way that's going to make more real-time computing. We need people who understand the visualization, because at the end of the day, if the doctors can't see the data in a way that's intuitive and understandable and something they can interact with quickly, it's not going to be as useful. So we need people from the visualization side and the artist side all the way down to low-level programming. And so I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities, and I think that's, we're going to see so much advancement in the next 10, 15 years that it's a great area. There's a lot of interdisciplinary work to be done, and I think it's a fantastic area for people to get into.